My sister attacked me at my wedding. She's just emotional, you provoked her, my parents screamed while I bled. I went no contact that night. 3 months later, she's in prison for domestic violence and my parents are begging for forgiveness. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My name is Audrey, and this is the story of how my sister assaulted me at my own wedding, how my parents defended her, and how the truth, after years of being buried, finally came out and sent her to prison. This wasn't a single, sudden storm. It was a slow-building poison, dripping into the foundations of our family since the day my sister was born. It had been happening my whole life, long before I ever put on that white dress. To understand the explosion, you first have to understand the pressure that built for 28 years. From the outside, we were the perfect American family. We lived in a lovely 2-story colonial in a neighborhood with manicured lawns and friendly block parties. My father was a respected, successful real estate developer, and my mother was deeply involved in local charities, her picture often in the society pages of the local paper. We had everything a child could want. The problem was, there were 2 children, but only one was ever truly wanted. My sister, Meredith, is 2 years younger than me. From the moment she came home from the hospital, a bundle of pink with a surprisingly loud cry, she was the sun our family orbited around. If she smiled, it was a cause for celebration. If she scraped her knee, it was a 5-alarm emergency. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, responsible older sister. I was the wallpaper. I was just expected to understand, to make way, to be the easy one. The pattern was set early. I remember being 12 and working for what felt like an eternity on my science fair project. It was a big, ambitious model of the solar system. I didn't just want I wanted to create something beautiful. I spent my allowance on special modeling clay and wire. I remember the frustration of trying to get Saturn's rings perfectly thin, spending hours shaping and reshaping them. I hand-painted every planet, looking at pictures from encyclopedias to get the colors just right, the pale blue dot of Earth, the angry red of Mars. When it was done, it was the proudest I had ever been of anything. The night before the fair, I placed it carefully on the center of our big oak dining room table to let the final coat of paint dry. I couldn't wait to show my teacher. The next morning, I came downstairs for breakfast, and my heart just stopped. The solar system was obliterated. Smashed. Jupiter was cracked in half, its great red spot now a sad smear. Mercury and Venus were gone entirely, probably rolled under the furniture. Meredith was standing there, in her pajamas, with big, crocodile tears welling in her eyes. She was 10. "I'm so sorry, Audi," she hiccuped. I got up to get some water, and I tripped in the dark. My mother rushed over, but not to me. She wrapped her arms around Meredith. "Oh, sweetie, it's okay. It was an accident. Don't cry." My father, sipping his coffee and reading the paper, glanced over the top of his glasses at the wreckage. "Audrey," he said with a heavy sigh, "this is why we don't leave projects out on the dining room table. You know better. It's a high-traffic area." I just stood there, speechless. My 6 weeks of work, my pride, my hope for the science fair, all destroyed. And somehow, in this upside-down world, I was the one at fault. Meredith never even had to say a real apology. My mother told me I should be more forgiving. That was the first time I truly understood, in my family, there were 2 sets of rules. It wasn't a one-time thing. It was 1,000 small cuts. For my 13th birthday, my aunt gave me a beautiful leather-bound diary with a little lock and key. I was so excited to have a private place for my thoughts. A week later, I came home from school to find Meredith in my room, reading it aloud to her friend, both of them giggling. When I snatched it from her, she ran crying to Mom, claiming I had scared her. I was the one who got grounded for not learning to share. The stakes got higher in high school. I was a straight-A student, a bookworm. I was co-captain of the debate team and I was laser-focused on getting a scholarship. I knew my parents were saving for Meredith's college fund. She was the one with the expensive hobbies, horseback riding, tennis lessons. I was on my own. I was on track to be valedictorian, and I needed that distinction for the academic scholarships I was applying for. A week before final exams my senior year, a vicious rumor started. It was whispered in the halls, in the cafeteria, Audrey has the answers to the calculus final. My calculus teacher, a man I deeply respected, called me to his desk after class. He looked at me with such disappointment. Audrey, I have to ask you. The shame was so intense I could barely breathe. The principal had to get involved. An investigation was launched. They searched my locker. They searched my book bag. They found nothing. Because I had done nothing. But a cloud of suspicion hung over me for the rest of the year. I didn't get valedictorian, they gave it to the salutatorian instead, to avoid any controversy. A key scholarship I had counted on went to someone else. I later found out from a mutual friend, who was eaten up with guilt, that Meredith had started it all. She had told one of the most notorious gossips in the sophomore class that she'd seen me get a copy of the test from a friend whose uncle worked for the printing company. It was a complete, malicious fabrication. When I confronted her in her bedroom, she was painting her nails. She didn't even look up. I was just worried you were stressing yourself out too much, she said, blowing on her fingers. I thought if you didn't have to worry about being valedictorian, you'd relax. When I, in a rage, told my parents what she'd done, my mother put her arm around Meredith's shoulders. Audrey, that's a terrible accusation. Your sister was just being protective. You're always so high-strung. That was my life. A constant, low-grade fever of injustice, with my parents acting as the source of the infection. College was my escape. I put an hour of highway between me and my family and started to build a life where I wasn't just Meredith's responsible older sister. I made friends. I got my degree in library sciences. I found a sense of self. And in a quiet corner of a bustling coffee shop, I found Miles. I used to go to the daily grind every Saturday morning. It was my ritual. I'd get a large latte and a book and sit in the big comfy armchair by the window. Miles was always there, too, at a small table with a laptop and a sketchbook. He was a graphic designer. For weeks, we just exchanged polite smiles. Then one day, there was a mix-up with our orders. We both got each other's ridiculously complicated lattes. He got my non-fat, extra shot vanilla, and I got his whole milk, no foam mocha. We laughed about it, and he invited me to sit with him. We talked for 3 hours. It was the easiest conversation I'd ever had. He was different. He listened with his whole body, leaning forward, his eyes never leaving mine. When I told him tentative stories about my childhood, he didn't say I was being dramatic. He'd get this quiet, serious look on his face and say, "That must have been so hard for you." For the first time, I felt truly validated. We dated for 2 years. They were the best years of my life. He showed me what a healthy, supportive partnership looked like. He was my biggest cheerleader. When he proposed, it wasn't some grand public gesture. It was on a Tuesday night in our cozy little apartment, surrounded by takeout boxes after a long day at work. He just looked at me and said, "I can't imagine doing this with anyone else." It was perfect. Telling my family was an ordeal. We drove to their house for dinner. The air was thick with polite, meaningless small talk about the weather and my dad's latest real estate deal. Finally, during a lull, I took a deep breath. "Well, we have some news," I said, holding up my left hand. The diamond sparkled under the dining room light. My mother gasped. "Oh, my goodness. It's beautiful. Miles, you have wonderful taste." Then, immediately, she turned. "Meredith, darling, come look. Your sister's engaged. Meredith, who had been scrolling on her phone, sauntered over. She gave my ring a cursory glance that lasted half a second. Wow. That's a very classic choice. Cute. Then, without missing a beat, she turned to my father. Speaking of big news, Dad, did you tell them I'm on track to get that big promotion? I'm pretty sure I'm going to be the youngest senior associate at the firm. And just like that, the conversation shifted. My once-in-a-lifetime moment was over, steamrolled by another of Meredith's accomplishments. The red flags, which had been waving gently in the breeze my whole life, became giant, flapping banners. A few weeks later, we went wedding dress shopping. My mother insisted Meredith come. It was supposed to be a joyous, lovely day. I tried on maybe 10 dresses. Finally, I put one on, and I knew. It was simple, A-line, with delicate lace sleeves. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a bride. Tears welled in my eyes. That's the one, I whispered. My mother agreed it was lovely. Meredith, however, came over with 2 flutes of sparkling rose from the shop attendant. A toast to the bride, she said, her smile a little too wide. She handed me a glass, and as I took it, she made a clumsy, theatrical stumble, sloshing the entire contents of her glass down the pristine ivory bodice of the dress. A dark pink stain bloomed across the lace. Oh my God! I am so clumsy. Audrey, I'm so sorry, she cried, dabbing at it uselessly with a napkin. The shop manager rushed over, her face a mask of professional horror. My mom just sighed, shaking her head. Honestly, Meredith, you could trip over air. There was no malice in her voice, only fond exasperation. As if this was just a charming quirk and not a deliberate act of sabotage. I stood there, watching the stain set, and felt nothing but a cold, heavy resignation. Of course this had happened. The final warning came from Miles. He told me that Meredith had cornered him at a family dinner, putting a hand on his arm and speaking in a low, conspiratorial whisper. She told him how thrilled she was for us, but that she felt it was her duty as a sister to warn him. She told him I had a history of instability and making things up for attention and that I could be very difficult to live with. Miles came home that night, his jaw tight with anger. He told me every word. I wasn't even surprised. That's just what she does, I said, my voice weary. It's not okay, Audrey, he insisted, taking my hands. It is not okay. But listen to me. I know who you are. I'm marrying you. We're a team. We'll handle her together. And I knew he meant it. But as our wedding day approached, a knot of dread was tightening in my stomach. I wasn't just planning a wedding, I felt like I was preparing for a battle. In the months leading up to the wedding, I developed a strategy of what I called Meredith mitigation. I gave her tasks that were impossible to sabotage. She was in charge of the guest book. She was tasked with making sure the transportation for out-of-town guests was arranged, a task I secretly double-checked and confirmed myself. It was exhausting. It felt like I was planning 2 events, my wedding and a containment strategy for my sister. The wedding day itself dawned bright and sunny, a perfect October day. But inside the bridal suite where we were getting ready, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My bridesmaids, my cousin Paige among them, were wonderful. They fluffed my dress, made sure I ate something, and kept a protective circle around me. My mother, however, seemed to think it was Meredith's big day. Meredith, honey, your hair is perfect. You look like a movie star, she gushed, fussing with a curl on Meredith's head. She glanced at me. Oh, Audrey, you look nice too. Very classic. Meredith, in her role as maid of honor, was in her element, delivering a masterclass in psychological warfare. As the makeup artist was finishing my look, Meredith peered over her shoulder. Wow, that's a lot of makeup. I've always thought you looked better with a more natural look, but you do you. Later, as I was finally slipping into my new, unstained wedding dress, she circled me like a shark. You know, it's amazing what a good foundation garment can do, isn't it? That dress is so much more flattering than the other one. Really streamlines your figure. Paige shot her a look that could curdle milk. I just smiled, a tight, brittle thing I had perfected over a lifetime. Thank you, Meredith, I said. I'm so glad you approve. I focused on the image in the mirror. Today was about me and Miles. I repeated it like a mantra. Me and Miles, me and Miles. The one moment of pure, untainted joy was walking down that aisle. The church was filled with flowers. The organ was playing. All our friends were there, their faces beaming. And at the end of the aisle was Miles. The moment our eyes met, everything else fell away. The anxiety, the family drama, Meredith, it all just dissolved. There was only him. The ceremony was a beautiful, happy blur. We exchanged the vows we had written ourselves. He promised to always be my team. I promised to always be his. When he slid the warm gold band onto my finger, it felt like coming home. We were pronounced husband and wife. He kissed me, and our guests erupted in cheers. A wave of profound relief washed over me. We had done it. The hard part was over. We were married. The reception was held in a beautiful old ballroom with crystal chandeliers and a big dance floor. For the first hour, it was everything I'd dreamed of. We had our first dance to our favorite song. Our friends gave hilarious, heartfelt toasts. I even had a surprisingly pleasant, if stiff, dance with my father, during which he gave me some unsolicited advice on our mortgage. I tried to keep tabs on Meredith. I saw her at the open bar, laughing loudly with a group of Miles's cousins. I saw her on the dance floor, her movements a little too wild. She seemed to be having a good time, and a foolish, tiny part of me dared to hope that maybe she would just let me have this one day. Maybe she would be content with being the beautiful, charming maid of honor and let the bride have her moment. Paige came up to me as I was catching my breath at our table. Just a heads up, she said, her voice low. She's mixing champagne and tequila. And she just told Uncle Robert a long, dramatic story about how hard it was growing up in your shadow. I sighed, my stomach clenching. Of course she did. Just stay away from her, Paige advised. Let Miles run interference. I nodded, my dream of a drama-free day evaporating. I just needed to survive the next 2 hours. We just had to cut the cake and toss the bouquet, and then we could leave for our honeymoon, for our life. But I should have known. I should have known Meredith would never let me leave without burning it all to the ground first. The turning point happened about an hour later. The party was in full swing. The band was playing a loud cover of a popular song, and the dance floor was a swirling mass of happy people. I had just finished a dance with Miles's grandfather and was making my way through the crowd to get a glass of water. That's when I saw her. Meredith was standing near the grand archway that led to the lobby and the restrooms, and she was waving me over frantically. Audrey! Audrey, come here a second, she yelled, her voice sharp enough to cut through the music. It's about Mom, she's not feeling well. A spike of alarm, mixed with suspicion, went through me. But the thought of my mom being sick was enough to make me move. I excused myself from a conversation and followed her. She led me past the coat check and into a wide, carpeted hallway that was mercifully quiet. There was no sign of my mother. Where is she? I asked, looking around. The moment we were out of the main line of sight, Meredith's entire posture changed. The look of frantic concern on her face evaporated, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. She blocked my path. Mom's fine, she sneered. I, however, am not. I sighed, my shoulders slumping. Meredith, I am not doing this with you. Not tonight. Oh, yes, you are, she said, taking a menacing step closer. The smell of tequila and expensive perfume rolled off her in waves. Tonight is the perfect night. St. Audrey's perfect wedding. You finally get everything you've ever wanted, don't you? The perfect husband, the perfect little life. You think you're so much better than the rest of us. That is not true, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I just want to be happy. Why is that such a threat to you? Because you don't deserve it, she shrieked, her voice echoing in the hallway. You've had everything handed to you your whole life, while I've had to fight for every little thing. The sheer delusion of that statement stole my breath. I just stared at her. You are living in a completely different reality, Meredith. I tried to step around her, to get back to the safety of the party, back to Miles. I'm done, I said firmly. I'm going back to my husband. As I moved to pass her, she lunged. It happened so fast. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into the delicate skin above my elbow. You are never walking away from me again, she screamed. She shoved me, with all her strength. I was completely off balance, my heels sinking into the plush carpet. I stumbled backward, flailing, and crashed against the hallway wall. Before I could even cry out, she was on me. Her face was inches from mine, twisted into a mask of pure, ugly hatred I had only seen glimpses of before. She grabbed the beautiful, scalloped lace neckline of my wedding dress with both of her hands, and with a guttural roar, she tore it. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet hall. A violent, ripping sound of delicate threads and dreams being shredded. I screamed then, a raw, terrified sound. Meredith, stop it! What are you doing? But she was lost to reason. She shoved me again, away from the wall. This time, there was nothing to catch me. I fell to the floor in a heap of white satin and shattered hopes. My head hit the carpet with a dull thud. Dazed, I looked up from the floor. My sister, my maid of honor, was standing over me, her chest heaving, a piece of my dress still clutched in her fist. And just at that moment, Miles and Paige rounded the corner, their faces bright with laughter from the party. The laughter died on their lips. They froze, their eyes widening in horror at the scene in front of them, me, the bride, on the floor in a ruined dress, and my sister standing over me like a predator. Oh my God, Paige whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Miles was a blur of motion. Get the hell away from her, he roared, a sound so full of fury it seemed to shake the walls. He rushed forward and put himself between us, physically shielding me from Meredith. And Meredith, the actress, did what she always did. Her face crumpled, and she burst into loud, theatrical sobs. She started it, she wailed. She said horrible, horrible things about me. I just sat there on the cold floor, the adrenaline turning to ice in my veins, trembling uncontrollably. I looked at the torn fabric of my dress, at my husband's back as he protected me, at my sister putting on the performance of her life, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. The world came crashing back in an instant. The shouts had drawn attention. Guests began to trickle into the hallway, their curious faces turning to shock as they took in the tableau. A woman gasped. Someone whispered, "What on earth happened?" The venue coordinator, a panicked look on his face, was already on his phone, presumably calling security. Paige was kneeling beside me, her hands hovering, afraid to touch me. Audrey, are you okay? Did she hurt you? I couldn't answer. I could only stare at the unraveling threads on my dress. Then, my parents arrived, pushing their way through the small crowd. My mother's eyes scanned the scene, me, a mess on the floor, Miles, standing guard like a sentry, Meredith, weeping into her hands. And without a moment's hesitation, she made her choice. She rushed right past me, her eyes fixed on her favored child. Meredith, my baby. What's wrong? What happened? She cried, gathering Meredith into her arms. Tell Mommy what happened. It was a physical blow, sharper than any fall. In that moment, I felt myself split in two. The part of me that was the daughter, the little girl who still, somewhere deep down, craved her mother's comfort, just withered and died. My father was right behind her, his face a thundercloud of fury. He didn't come to me. He strode directly up to Miles. "What did you do?" he snarled, jabbing a finger at Miles's chest. "What did you say to set her off?" Miles looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. "What did I do? Are you blind? Your daughter just assaulted my wife," he yelled, his voice cracking with disbelief. "She ripped her dress. She knocked her to the ground. Don't you dare raise your voice to me," my father shot back, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't know what lies Audrey has been telling you, but Meredith is the sensitive one. Audrey knows how to push her buttons. She's always been jealous." I listened to his words, and a strange, cold calm washed over me. The shaking stopped. The tears dried up. It was the clarity that comes from hitting rock bottom. They weren't just mistaken. They weren't just confused. They were actively, willingly participating in the lie. They were protecting the abuser and blaming the victim, right there in front of a dozen witnesses. They were sacrificing me to preserve their perfect image of their perfect daughter. 2 uniformed police officers arrived then, and a hush fell over the hallway. They were professional, calm, their presence cutting through the hysteria. One officer began quietly asking the guests to return to the ballroom, while the other, a woman with tired but kind eyes, knelt down in front of me. "Ma'am, are you injured?" she asked gently. I shook my head, still unable to find my voice. Paige answered for me. "She's shaken up. Her sister attacked her." The officer nodded and stood up, turning to my parents and Meredith. My mother immediately launched into her performance. "Officer, this is all a terrible misunderstanding," she began, dabbing at her eyes. "It was just a little sisterly argument that got a bit emotional. Weddings are stressful, you know." My father stepped forward, trying to take control. "Look, I'm Jonathan Miller," he said, using his full name as if it were a title. "I think we can handle this as a family. There's no need to make a scene or file any reports. Audrey can be very dramatic." The officer looked from my father's arrogant face to my torn dress, and her expression hardened. She had seen this before. She turned back to me. "Ma'am," she said, her voice clear and cutting through my mother's protests. "Your cousin and your husband are witnesses to an assault. You have a torn dress and you are on the floor. Do you wish to press charges against your sister?" The entire hallway went silent. Every eye was on me. My mother let out a strangled gasp. "Audrey, don't you dare," she hissed. "You will not ruin this family. You will not ruin your sister's life over a little fit of temper." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty distance. I looked at my father, whose eyes were burning with a warning, "You will regret this." I looked at Meredith, who was peering at me from behind my mother's shoulder, her tears magically gone, replaced by a look of smug certainty. She was sure I would back down. I always had. Then I looked at Miles. He was standing right beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder, a silent, unwavering pillar of support. He didn't tell me what to do. He just looked at me with love and trust. He would stand by me, no matter what I chose. And I chose myself. For the first time in my entire life, I chose me. I met the officer's gaze, my voice coming out stronger than I ever thought possible. "Yes," I said. "I do. I want to press charges." The sound my mother made was something between a scream and a sob. My father looked like he wanted to strike me. But for the first time, their rage couldn't touch me. A sense of profound, terrifying freedom washed over me. The wedding was over. The family I thought I had was a lie. But my life, my real life, was just about to begin. If you're still listening to my story up to this point, it would mean the world to me if you could hit that like button and comment the number 1 down below. It lets me know that you've given me a like, and that you're here with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me to keep going. Please, comment the number 1, and I'll continue with the rest of my story. Our wedding night ended under the harsh, fluorescent lights of a police precinct. I sat on a hard plastic chair, a borrowed police jacket over my shoulders covering my ruined dress, and gave my official statement. Miles and Paige sat nearby, giving theirs. Every detail felt surreal, like I was describing a scene from a movie, not the worst night of my life. Meredith, I learned later, had been taken to the station, but my father had his high-powered lawyer there within an hour. She was released on bail before the sun came up. We didn't go to the airport for our honeymoon flight to Hawaii. We went home to our quiet apartment. The remnants of our pre-wedding excitement were everywhere, a just-married banner hanging crookedly in the living room, a half-empty bottle of champagne on the counter. It all felt like artifacts from another lifetime. I took off the dress, not even looking at it, folded it, and shoved it into a black trash bag. I put the bag in the back of my closet, a tomb for a day that had died. The weeks that followed were a special kind of hell. It wasn't just the trauma of the attack, it was the psychological warfare waged by my parents. They called. They texted. They emailed. At first, it was begging. My mother would leave long, tearful voicemails. "Audrey, please, you're tearing this family apart. Meredith is a wreck. You have to drop the charges. Think of her future." When begging didn't work, they turned to threats. My father left a clipped, cold message. "If you go through with this, you are no longer my daughter. Don't expect a cent of your inheritance. I'll see to it you regret this." After a week of this, we changed our phone numbers. But they were relentless. They started calling my office. They even showed up at our apartment one evening, ringing the doorbell incessantly until a neighbor threatened to call the police. We lived like fugitives in our own home. We knew we had to leave. The city, which had once felt like a haven, now felt like a cage. Every corner held a memory, and we were constantly looking over our shoulders. Miles's company had a large branch in a city on the other side of the country. He put in for a transfer, explaining the situation to his boss, who was thankfully a compassionate man. The transfer was approved. We had 1 month to pack up our entire lives. The process was mechanical, numbing. Taping up boxes, wrapping plates in newspaper, sorting through years of accumulated stuff. Each object was a decision. The photo albums from my childhood felt like propaganda, full of smiling, happy pictures that told a lie. I packed one, for reasons I didn't understand, and threw the rest out. The hardest goodbye was to Paige. She came over the night before we left, and we just sat on the floor surrounded by boxes, drinking cheap wine out of plastic cups. "I'm so sorry, Audi," she said, her eyes full of tears. "I'm so sorry they're like this." "It's not your fault," I told her, hugging her tight. "Thank you for being the only one who ever saw it." The drive out of town was silent. We didn't listen to the radio. I just watched the familiar streets and landmarks of my life disappear in the rearview mirror. It felt like an amputation. Painful, necessary, and I knew I would be scarred forever. Our new apartment was a sterile, empty box in a city where we knew no one. The first few weeks were incredibly lonely. Miles would go to work, and I would just sit there, surrounded by unpacked boxes, too paralyzed by depression to even open them. I'd try to cook, but I'd forget things on the stove and burn them. I'd try to watch TV, but I couldn't follow the plot of anything. The legal case proceeded without us. We gave depositions over video conference. Meredith's expensive lawyer did exactly what we expected. He painted her as an emotional, unstable young woman who had a momentary psychotic break due to the stress of the wedding. He presented her as deeply remorseful. Because she had a clean record and a prominent family, the prosecutor's office was inclined to be lenient. I spoke with the assistant DA assigned to our case, a young woman who seemed tired and overworked. She warned me that getting a serious conviction would be an uphill battle. Ultimately, Meredith was convicted of misdemeanor assault. No jail time. She received a fine, which my parents paid instantly, 2 years of probation, and a court order to attend 52 weeks of anger management counseling. It felt like a slap on the wrist. A slap in the face. My parents spun it as a victory, telling everyone the judge saw it for what it was, a minor family dispute. But we were free. 300 miles away, we started the slow, painful process of building a new life, a life where we were the only architects. I finally sought professional help and found a therapist. In her quiet, safe office, I began to unpack the heavy baggage I had been carrying my whole life. It was the beginning of a long road, but for the first time, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. The 4 years that followed were the quietest of my life. The silence from my family, which at first felt jarring, slowly became a peaceful, protective blanket. We settled into our new city. I eventually found the courage to start job hunting and was hired at the city's main library. The orderly quiet of the stacks and the smell of old paper became my sanctuary. Miles excelled at his job, earning the respect of his new colleagues and a significant promotion to a senior design role. We slowly built a new community from scratch. It started with a friendly couple from our apartment building who invited us over for dinner. Then came colleagues from work, people from a weekend hiking club Miles joined. These friendships were different. They were based on mutual respect and genuine affection, not obligation or shared history. This was our chosen family, and they were more real to us than our own blood relatives. On our second anniversary, we bought a small bungalow with a yard that was mostly weeds, but it was ours. We spent weekends painting walls, planting a garden, and making it a home. We adopted a clumsy, goofy golden retriever and named him Sam. Life became a series of gentle, happy moments, walking the dog in the park, hosting barbecues for our friends, quiet nights on the couch watching movies. It was a beautifully ordinary life, and I treasured every second of it because I knew how easily it could be destroyed. We had a strict no-contact rule with my family. New phone numbers, blocked emails, private social media. The only tether I kept was Paige. We scheduled a phone call for the first Sunday of every month. She was my lifeline to the world I had left behind, but our conversations were mostly about her life, my life, our futures. We rarely talked about my parents or Meredith. It was an unspoken agreement. But through her, I learned small things. Meredith had, of course, breezed through her anger management classes, charming the therapist and treating the whole thing as an inconvenience. She was still living at home, still working for my father, who was grooming her to take over the business one day. My parents had effectively erased me from the family narrative. To distant relatives and old family friends, they spoke of me in tragic tones, as their troubled daughter who had cut them off for no reason. It was easier than admitting the truth. The only time I saw them again was at Paige's wedding, 2 years after my own. I was her maid of honor. Flying back to my hometown felt like visiting a foreign country. I was a different person now. Paige was a rock, running interference and making it clear to my parents that they were to be on their best behavior. They were polite, in a cold, distant way. My mother gave me an airy, "Audrey, you look well." My father gave me a stiff nod. Meredith looked straight through me as if I were a ghost. Seeing them all playing the part of a happy, normal family was profoundly strange. But as I stood by Paige's side, watching her marry a wonderful man, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a quiet confirmation that I had made the right choice. A year ago, our quiet, happy life became something more. We found out we were expecting. The moment I saw the 2 pink lines on that test, a fierce, primal wave of love and protectiveness washed over me. This baby, this tiny, innocent life, would have the one thing I never did, a safe harbor. My child would grow up knowing they were the center of our universe. They would be loved, protected, and believed. I was not just building a life for myself anymore, I was building a fortress for my child, a fortress my family would never be allowed to breach. The 3rd trimester was a happy blur of activity. We painted the spare room a soft yellow. We assembled a crib, fumbling with the instructions and laughing at our incompetence. Life was full of hope and anticipation. The past felt like a distant country I had visited long ago. I was finally at peace. Then, one Tuesday night around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, and my policy was to always let those go to voicemail. But for some reason I can't explain, I felt a jolt of anxiety, a prickle on the back of my neck. I answered it. "Hello?" A choked, ragged sound came from the other end. "Audrey? Is that you?" The voice was thin and trembling, almost unrecognizable. But I knew it. It was my mother. My hand, which had been resting on my swollen belly, tightened. Miles looked up from his book, his brow furrowed with concern. "What do you want?" My voice was colder than I intended. "Audrey, please, something terrible has happened," she whispered, and then her voice broke, dissolving into racking, hysterical sobs. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the sounds of her world falling apart. A part of me, a dark, ugly part, felt nothing. It took her several minutes to calm down enough to speak coherently. Miles had come to stand beside me, his hand on my back, a silent support. He motioned for me to put the phone on speaker. "Mom, what is it?" I said, my patience wearing thin. "It's Meredith," she gasped. "And your father." Her story came out in a jumbled, panicked rush. She told me that Meredith had gotten married about a year before. We hadn't known. She had married a man named Eliza, a man my mother described as a sweet, gentle soul from a good family. They had met at church. My mother painted a picture of a perfect marriage, how happy they all were that Meredith had found someone who understood her sensitive nature. "It was all a lie, Audrey," she cried. "A horrible, horrible lie." Last Thursday, Eliza's boss, worried that he hadn't shown up for work all week, had called the police and asked them to perform a welfare check. When the police entered the pristine suburban home my father had bought for them, they found Eliza in the master bedroom. He was conscious, but he had been severely beaten. My mother listed his injuries in a flat, horrified monotone: 2 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, bruises all over his face and body. I sank down onto the couch, feeling dizzy. Miles gripped my shoulder, his knuckles white. "What happened?" Miles asked into the phone, his voice hard as steel. The next part of the story was the most sickening of all. Eliza, safe in the hospital, had finally told the police everything. Meredith had been physically abusing him for their entire marriage. It had started with emotional manipulation and control, then escalated to slapping and shoving, and finally, to full-blown beatings. He had been too ashamed and too scared to tell anyone. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was that my father knew. He had been actively helping Meredith cover it up. Months ago, Eliza had worked up the courage to tell his parents what was happening. His parents had, naturally, been horrified and told him to leave her. But before they could intervene, my father paid them a visit. He had leveraged a business deal he had with Eliza's father's company, threatening to pull out and ruin him financially if they didn't convince their son to stop telling these vicious lies. Terrified of ruin, they had backed down, telling Eliza he must have been exaggerating. My father had isolated Eliza, turning his own family against him. When Eliza tried to leave, my father had threatened to make sure he'd never work in the state again. The final, brutal attack had occurred because Eliza had secretly secured a new job in a different state and had told Meredith he was leaving her for good. That's when she had lost control and beaten him so badly he couldn't even walk. After the attack, Eliza had called my father, begging for help. My father's advice? "Put some ice on your ribs, son, and remember the vows you took before God. You handle your wife." My mother finished her story with a desperate, wailing plea. "They arrested them both, Audrey. Meredith for the assault, and your father, they're charging him with witness intimidation and conspiracy. I'm all alone. The lawyer says it's serious. I need you. I need you to come home. Your family needs you. I listened to my mother's plea, and I felt a surge of something so cold and hard it felt like a shard of ice forming in my chest. All the years of pain, of being gaslit, of being the family scapegoat, it all coalesced into a single moment of absolute clarity. Family? I said, and my voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper, but it was filled with all the fury I had suppressed for a lifetime. You want to talk about family now? Audrey, please, don't be like this. Don't be like what? I cut her off, my voice rising. Like the daughter you ignored? Like the victim you blamed? Where was this desperate need for family when your golden child was ripping my wedding dress off my body in front of 50 people? Where was family when you stood in front of police officers and lied, telling them I was the one who provoked her, that I was the dramatic one? She started sobbing again, a pathetic, broken sound. I know we made mistakes, Audrey, I know. Mistakes? I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. A mistake is when you take a wrong turn. What you did was a choice. A lifetime of choices. You chose to look away when she killed my hamster. You chose to believe her lies in high school. You chose her on my wedding day. You chose her every single day of my life. You and Dad didn't just enable a monster, you handcrafted her. You polished her and defended her and unleashed her on the world. Eliza is in the hospital because of your choices. This isn't a crisis that happened to you. This is the bill for the life you built finally coming due. I took a shaky breath, the final question I ever wanted to ask her on my lips. I just want to know one thing, Mom. Did it ever, even once, cross your mind that if you had given Meredith a single real consequence when she was a child, if you had gotten her help instead of covering for her, that maybe an innocent man wouldn't be lying in a hospital with broken ribs right now? The other end of the line was silent except for her choked breathing. Finally, a single, shattered word. Yes. Well, I said, my voice empty of all emotion. You can think about that for the rest of your life. I ended the call and blocked her number. Miles just held me, and I let myself cry. Not for them, but for the little girl who had deserved so much better. I cried for Eliza. And I cried with relief, because the truth was finally, irrevocably out. The following weeks were a whirlwind of news, all of it relayed through Paige. The story was big news in my old hometown. The prominent real estate developer and his daughter arrested for a brutal domestic violence cover-up. It was a scandal. My father's picture was on the front page of the local paper. His business partners deserted him in droves. His carefully constructed empire of respectability crumbled to dust overnight. The case against them was airtight. Eliza was a sympathetic victim, and his parents, consumed by guilt, cooperated fully with the prosecution, telling them everything about my father's threats. With his parents' testimony and the evidence of his injuries, Meredith had no choice. She took a plea deal. 8 years in state prison for aggravated domestic violence. My father, arrogant to the end, tried to fight the charges. But the evidence of witness intimidation was overwhelming. His trial is next month, but his lawyers are apparently trying to negotiate a deal as well. The man who had ruled my life with fear and financial threats was broken. There was no joy in it. Just a quiet, somber sense of justice. The scales, after a lifetime of being tilted, had finally balanced. In the wake of the arrests, the dominoes continued to fall. The biggest shock came when Paige told me my mother had filed for divorce. She had hired her own lawyer and was severing all ties with my father. According to Paige, she had completely broken down. She was now in intensive therapy, trying to understand her own complicity in the nightmare her life had become. About a month after my final phone call with her, a thick envelope arrived. It was a 12-page letter, handwritten in my mother's familiar, elegant script. I almost threw it away, but Miles encouraged me to read it. It wasn't a letter of excuses. It was a confession. She took responsibility for everything. For favoring Meredith, for dismissing my pain, for choosing appearances over her own child's well-being. She wrote about the wedding in excruciating detail, admitting that in the moment, her only instinct was to protect Meredith from consequences, an instinct that had been honed over 30 years. I see now, she wrote, that in protecting Meredith from the world, I failed to protect the world, and you, from Meredith. That is a sin I will carry with me to my grave. I read the letter and I wept. I wept for the mother I might have had, for the relationship we could have shared if she had found this clarity decades earlier. Miles and I talked about it for a long time. Could I forgive her? Maybe, someday. Could I let her back into my life? Into my child's life? The risk was too great. The trust was too broken. I never responded to the letter. A few weeks later, I received an email with a generic subject line. It was from Eliza. Paige had given him my contact information, with my permission. His email was short, but it meant more to me than my mother's 12 pages. He wrote that his therapist had encouraged him to reach out. He said that in the discovery process, his lawyer had gotten the old police report from my wedding. He wrote, "Reading your statement, I felt like I was reading my own story. Thank you for being brave enough to press charges back then. Knowing I wasn't the only one has been a crucial part of my healing. You are a survivor." I wrote back immediately. I told him he was the brave one, and that I wished him nothing but peace and healing. We have maintained a quiet, occasional correspondence since. We are members of a club no one ever wants to join, but there is a strange comfort in knowing you are not alone. His parents have become fierce advocates for domestic violence awareness in their community. They turned their shame and regret into action, a testament to their love for their son. They are healing, too. 2 months ago, I went to the hospital and, after 14 hours of labor, gave birth to a perfect, healthy, beautiful baby girl. We named her Hope. Holding her, feeling her tiny body warm against my chest, is a feeling I can't even describe. It's a love so fierce, so absolute, it rearranges your entire soul. My life is no longer just my own. It is a promise I make to her, every single day. My days are now filled with feedings and diaper changes and the magical, gummy smiles of a newborn. It's exhausting and it's wonderful. Miles is an amazing father, so natural and loving. We are a team. We are a family. A real one. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when I'm rocking Hope back to sleep, my mind wanders back to my old life. I think about my mother's letter. I think about my father in his empty mansion, awaiting trial. I think about Meredith, sitting in a prison cell. And I feel a profound sadness for the wreckage they made of their own lives. Then I look down at my daughter, and a powerful, unshakable resolve fills me. I think about what would have happened if I had stayed. If I had forgiven them, if I had let them back in. I know, with absolute certainty, that when Meredith is eventually released from prison, my parents would have expected me to welcome her back into the family. They would have insisted I let her around my child. They would have told me she had paid her debt to society, that she deserved another chance, that family forgives. That single thought is all the confirmation I will ever need that I made the only choice I could. The cycle stops with me. The generational trauma, the toxic dynamic of the golden child and the scapegoat, the disease of enabling, it all ends now. My daughter will grow up in a home where love is not a transaction. She will never be asked to dim her own light so that someone else can shine brighter. She will be loved for exactly who she is. She will be protected. She will be believed. Walking away from my family was the most painful amputation of my life. But it allowed me to heal. It allowed me to build this life, this beautiful, quiet, love-filled life. It allowed me to become the mother my daughter deserves. Thank you for listening to my story. It means so much to me to finally be able to share it. If you have a story of your own, if you've ever felt like the odd one out in your own family, please share your experience in the comments. We can find strength in knowing we are not alone. Please, take care of yourselves and protect your peace. It's the most valuable thing you have.